got little seedlings that you don't want to freeze, but you're worried that it's going to get to be 28 degrees tonight, you got to do something to protect them. One of the things people do is just simple cold frames, or you can use a little row cover. This just provides a little bit of insulation. This is just a simple, they call it a polyethylene grow tunnel. Provides just a little bit of insulation. You can put it on during the day, or put it on at night, take it off during the day. If the weather gets warm, you can leave it on for 2 weeks if you've got a little cold spell. And it will buy you a few degrees. And the difference between 28 degrees and 35 degrees is everything. That's the difference between freezing and all your seedlings dying and not freezing, and they just hold there really well. So letting them be cool is okay for the most part. But letting them freeze is going to kill them. If they have to be cold for too long, it can cause some stunting and stuff too. So even if you have a grow tunnel and your tomatoes are ready at the 1st of March and you plant them in your grow tunnel, it's still going to be cold at night, colder than they really want. They really want 50 degrees at night. And 35 is going to keep them from dying maybe, but it's not going to help them grow. So there again, timing your crop with the season is really important. So these work great especially for leafy greens, things that tolerate cold and grow while it's cold but still don't want to freeze. So, things like cilantro and dill you can grow great in a little covered cold frame or tunnel like that, but not necessarily things that like it hot, like basil and stuff like that. Please.
Okay, I'll share a disaster. So I tried wintering a garden over winter. And I missed the window and started planting in late October, or mid to late October. And then I went ahead and I bought some remay. And I went ahead and I bought some remay. I covered everything to get the germination temperature soil hotter. And I ended up getting starts. So they started going. I'm like, yay, I got something happening here. And then I just left the remay on thinking, okay, it's still cold out. I don't want to take it off. And we had this warm weather come. And I'm like, okay, maybe they're going to be fine. And so I pulled off all the remay. I have cilantro out right now.
Yeah.
And they're like this high.
Yeah.
They're hanging out there. And I've got some charts still hanging out there. And it's going to freeze now. And I'm thinking, should I put that remay back on it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what, definitely. And you don't even need to have any framework really with remay. That's just a really light fabric. You can just lay it right on top of the plants like a sheet, and it will do a lot for you. Especially if it gets down to 20 degrees, it might not make it, but it'll certainly help. Use that. If you've got a beautiful winter garden right now with a lot of things that aren't freeze hardy, like you're describing, like cilantro or arugula or spinach and stuff like that, cover it up still. Keep an eye on those night temperatures and keep it covered.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I stunted it all because...
No,
if it's just slow growing.
Slow growing because it's cold, but every time the weather warms up, those cold tolerant things are going to grow a little bit, just like those weeds in the garden that I'm talking about. They don't grow when there's snow on the ground, but every time the weather warms up to 50 degrees, like it's been getting close to on some of these days, it starts growing a little bit. So. Anyway, that's an excellent point. You've done great. I'd pat yourself on the back. I'd be harvesting if anything. Keep in mind that if it's all real thick in there and you've got that remay over it, there's less air circulation. And so that does create more opportunity for rot to happen. So if it's really, really thick where all those leaves are touching and you notice there's water on the leaves all the time because it's kind of wet out, you might consider thinning it out a little bit.
Yeah, that's why I pulled off the remay, was to give them air.
Yeah.
And plus it was warming up, so I thought I'd take a chance.
Thinning is helpful too for those situations.
Okay.
What's that fabric?
We call it remay, but a row cover is just anything. It can be just a light sheet. It depends on your scale. If you need 100 feet, look for something called row cover or remay.
It allows the water to come through where the plastics create condensation, but if it's raining out, it allows the water to come in, but it doesn't have as much light.
It diffuses the water a little bit, so you don't get hard droplets hitting your stuff. It just kind of creates more of a mist sort of a spray. Let's see if I'm going to lose myself here. Okay, so we're talking about technology. So there's lots of different things you can do to have sophisticated technology inside and outside And most of it's really pretty cheap. Lights are pretty cheap. A fluorescent light is pretty cheap. And that's really all you need for seedlings. If you're trying to grow flowers and fruits in your house, you need a more powerful light than that. But just to keep your seedlings from stretching, a fluorescent light is good enough. And there are lots of commercial grow lights available, but if you're getting one of those, don't buy a really expensive one just for seedlings. Get one that is just based on a fluorescent light bulb, and it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be less hot on your seedlings, and it's not going to take so much energy.
The lead lights work a lot better than just plain fluorescent. You get a lead light fluorescent, they're really good.
Right. So that's something that's rated for plants is the best, but yeah, most fluorescent lights produce a blue spectrum of light that is going to at least keep your stuff from stretching. I mentioned seed bombs on here. If you don't want to fool around with germinating all your plants inside and transplanting them outside, this is a fun idea. It's basically a pelleted seed. And so a seed bomb is a method where you take your seeds, whether it's beets or carrots or peas or corn or whatever, and you lightly mist them, and then you dust them with a little bit of mineral clay. And you basically dust them with some clay, and that clay sticks to the seeds, and you roll it around a little bit. Then when it starts forming a layer around the seeds, you mist them again, dust them with a little more stuff, roll it around again, dust it, until you've got seeds that are, you know, as big as marbles, until you've got these little balls that are as big as marbles, and then so you've got seeds that are covered in soil already. And what you do with those is you broadcast them. And so you have seeds that aren't going to be as likely to get eaten by the critters. You have seeds that aren't going to die from UV light when they germinate, and they've got a little source of soil around them already, and so they're easy to handle too, so you're less likely to overseed. If you're worried about how hard it is to handle those tiny little seeds and get them spaced at the right distancing, you know, pelleted seeds or seed bombs can make that a little bit easier. Some people even have 2 or 3 types of seeds growing all in one little seed bomb. Go ahead.
Could you use bentonite clay or what do you recommend?
So traditionally you use what's available around your house. You can use you can just use even like siftings from your compost and stuff like that. But it's I guess so. It does. I'm not going to make specific recommendations on what type of clay. I imagine you could just use talc and it would probably work okay. But the concept is basically, so you don't have to dig holes. It would be a no-till type of situation. So then you'd apply those on areas on soil that would be conducive for growing similar types of weeds. And so if you've got these weeds that always come up here, just broadcast some seed in that area without any sort of extra work on your hands and knees with a shovel or rototiller or tractor or whatever. So it can be a pretty easy way to germinate seeds. Related to that, there are a lot of types of commercial pelleted seeds. So carrot seeds we were talking about as being difficult to handle. These are pelleted, so they're a little easier to handle, and they've made them bright pink so you can actually even see them. So when you're putting them down in the row, you don't have to crawl down and get out the magnifying glass to see if there's actually a seed there, or did I plant that row or not, you know, sort of a situation. So it makes it a lot easier to space your seeds. And if you have you know, technology like automated seeders or things like that, a vacuum seeder some people have that are helpful for making flats of seeds. Sometimes these are a lot easier to work with than those tiny, tiny little seeds that, you know, get blown away or lost so easily. Sometimes these things are going to be treated with a chemical, and so I don't necessarily know on this one or not if this is a fungicide treated seed, but oftentimes when you see that coloring on there, it is treated with the fungicide, because a lot of it is a seedling, you know, as a young plant, those seeds are going to be vulnerable to all sorts of things, mice, you know, birds, and especially rot. And so if you're growing things in soil directly in the ground, you know, there's definitely going to be some kind of pathogen present, and this can Like the concept is it gives them a little bit of a protective barrier of fungicide to get them to a point where they can start growing. But typically they're not allowed in organic production because of that concept of fungicide. What most people do to get over the problems with root rot or damping off or fungus in general for seedlings is starting with planting them into a media that is going to be considered inert. So if you're growing into a seedling mix or any kind of commercial potting soil that doesn't have compost in it, if it has compost in it, it's not necessarily going to be inert. But if you grow in something that's a seedling mix, hopefully it doesn't have compost in it. Hopefully it's known to be pathogen free, and so you can get your plants off to a healthy start, get a root system on there. Once you get a root system on your plants, they're going to be a lot more resilient and resistant to all the diseases that do exist in the natural environment. So getting them started in something that's inert is really going to help. It's really, really common to find a good organic gardening book that has a recipe for seed starting soil, and it will definitely have compost in it. And that can be really great, but if you're not sure about your compost, or especially if you start your seeds at the wrong time of year, that compost is going to work against you in form of root rot or damping off. So much less likely to have damping off if you're working with a commercial seedling mix. But that being said, if you're really confident in your compost because you're well practiced at it, you can mix your own seedling mixes basically with compost and sand. And some people add a little bit of vermiculite or perlite to amend the soil structure. And then even nowadays, some people add what's called mycorrhizae to your seedling mix. And so mycorrhizae is basically fungus that forms a relationship, or it's fungus or bacteria that can form a relationship with the plant roots to basically improve their immune system and improve their vigor growing. And so if you have a little seedling that is inocular, or if you have a seed that you've treated with mycorrhizae, the concept is it's going to give it, instead of a fungicidal property, it's going to give it a companion to grow along with, to resist all those pathogens, other pathogens that are there. So instead of killing the other pathogens that are there, you're basically giving a beneficial host to take that space before the other pathogens can inoculate it. So they say like 90% of all plants form mycorrhizal relationships, but you're not guaranteed to get those relationships unless you know that you have that mycorrhizae present. And one of the good explanations of this, I thought it was made by my 4-year-old son who was running around here somewhere. I trialed this stuff last year on my corn and on my squash, and I had great results actually on that, for germination at least. And we were dusting our seeds with mycorrhizae, and it took very little product to do it. And I said, "Do you know why we're doing this, Isaac?" And he said, "Yeah, so they don't have to grow up by themselves. So the seeds don't have to grow up by themselves." And so I thought that was very, very well put. Couldn't say it better. So thank you, Isaac, for that explanation. Anyway.
Was that the concept of
yeah, but you're not, kind of. That's a concept of, I'm going to call it probiotics, garden probiotics, a little more than companion planting. But it is a similar result. I'm just not calling it a plant that is the companion. The idea of companion planting, though, can be similar, because if you have plants growing that are alternate hosts or known hosts for the mycorrhizae that you need for your seedlings, they can in effect be a companion plant, because you put your seedling there, there's already mycorrhizae present in the soil, and so those companion plants can serve as hosts for the probiotic benefits of the mycorrhizae. Okay, now seed saving. We're working through it. Thank you all for your patience so far. Seed saving, there's kind of a lot to be thinking about with seed saving, but basically the idea is it extends your gardening season. If you're thinking about the garden all year, you're going to develop a different kind of relationship with your garden. So In the late summer or fall or sometimes even winter, going out in the garden and investigating what kind of seed is available and seeing what's ripe and ready is a great way to get to know your garden better. And so seeing and observing the plants through all of their seasons is another way to really get to know all the plants better. And so you observe the full cycle and the full potential, and it extends your gardening season. They say that the Center for Disease Control says that if we garden for 2.5 hours a week, it reduces our likelihood of a host of diseases, including heart disease, various cancers, diabetes. 2.5 hours a week. That's no problem in spring and summer, but fall and winter, that's a little more challenging. So even just getting out in the garden for 15 minutes, seeing what's going on, shaking a little bit of seed into a jar or paper bag or something like that is valid, exercise and good for our health as well. So not to say it's always going to go great when you're collecting seed, but it is a good, healthy exercise for the time of year, for the different off times of year. And so once you've collected your seed, it can get kind of tricky because cleaning the seed can be a real trick. If you've got oats that you want to grow for yourself, you go ahead and collect all these oats, then you even strip all the seeds off of the chaff, you're still left with all these seed coats on there that are pretty tough to deal with. So unless you've got a little bit of automation for your process, the feasibility of doing all the seed cleaning by hand is kind of unreasonable. But generally speaking, most seeds can be cleaned pretty effectively just with appropriate screens. So knowing how big your seed is and basically shifting it around on a screen will create an abrasive surface that rubs on the seed coat or any extra stuff and lets the seed fall through, and then you've got a bowl full of seed. It's clean. And so if you can clean your seed, get all that extra fuzz or skin or whatever off of it, it's probably going to store a lot better because it's not going to hold humidity, it's going to be able to dry out appropriately, and you're going to be able to get it to store a little better. But if you store your seed with all that extra chaff that's with it, it might work just fine, but it might be harder to keep it from molding during the winter. So you can get kind of worked up about the limitations of not really being comfortable screening or cleaning your seed, but it's not something that should really be too discouraging, in my opinion. You can overcome that with a little bit of practice, and if you're comfortable with the process, if you don't mind the time it takes because you already know it's making you more healthy, that 2.5 hours, even if you kind of wasted your time, you didn't really waste your time. But if you do get some seed out of the deal, you want to make sure you are able to store it and keep it through the winter. So labeling it is like the most important thing you can do. If you don't label that seed, you're going to forget what it is. The seeds don't look like the plants. They say when plants enter that stage of flowering and fruiting and making seeds, they, on a kind of a spiritual level, they go from being takers from the earth, from the whatever plant womb that is the soil, and they've taken all that energy in and made their physical bodies, and then they release it back into the environment, and they release it through fragrance, and they release it even through these seeds that get bounced off and are even almost mobile. And they say that the seeds are almost like primitive forms of insects. The plant almost goes from being a plant into an animal in that seed form, and nutritionally, all the qualities of a seed, the nutrition in a seed is different from the nutrition in the plant. It's generally much higher in nitrogen, which is more common in animals than it is in plants. And so it also forms a hard seed coat, which is kind of like an exoskeleton. So it changes its properties basically as it goes into that seed stage. So get it clean, get it dry as you can. It's even appropriate to lay them out in an oven and on low temperature to really get all the water out of the seed. And once it is completely dry and labeled, you put it in a jar and seal it up.